All right. Sorry about that, guys. Good start. Happy Tuesday, everyone. Welcome back to the second live sports model show. I'm your host, Mackenzie Brooks, and I am joined by the team behind the numbers, the SportsLine Projection and Insights team. We have a lot to get through. Those who were there last week, you saw how this kind of works, how much we have to offer. We wanted to show you a lot. And we have a lot to show you today, too, but we want to get to your questions. So be active in the chat. We'll be responding in the chat. I'll have some on the screen. We really want to answer what you guys want. But before that, we have 15 games on the MLB slate today. So we're going to head over to John and Jake to take over on that for us. You guys can, get right into it with your favorite picks for today.
Yeah, so model today has value on two plays specifically that we're each going to talk about. The first one is on the Cardinals against the Twins. So the Cardinals money line plus 100 against the Twins. Miles Michaelis is starting at home for them. He's going up against Pablo Lopez for the Twins. The Twins are coming off getting swept by the Royals. They've lost 5 games in a row now. They're really struggling. Alex Kirilloff, probably their best hitter this season and middle of the lineup guy, is now on the IL. He was out of the IL, so that's a big loss for them. And they've been struggling to hit in the first place. The Twins definitely have the bullpen advantage, especially with Jordan Hicks being traded, but that doesn't mean the Cardinals can't get through the game, and they've got plenty of other options as well. I'm interested to see how many Cardinals we have by the trade deadline tonight to hit in that lineup. I think we'll have enough, especially if guys like Arenado and Goldschmidt aren't traded. I think we'll be fine. So it's definitely important to keep an eye on that there, and we're obviously going to keep an eye on that in terms of the model and see what the model thinks as soon as some of these trades go down. But we do have value on the Cardinals money line at home right now, and I definitely agree with it. Jake, what do you got on the other game that we have value on?
Yeah, today's a day where you would most likely want to play listed starters with the deadline at 6 p.m. So I know John always advocates to play listed starters. And if a team who's on the border or who's out, like the Cardinals, you might just want to play listed starters just to be safe. I don't think Michaelis is going to be traded just because he's already listed as the starter, which would be weird if he was going to be traded. But I like the Giants today. They're playing against Arizona, who's been one of the worst teams in July. And the big thing about this game is Alex Cobb's home splits are pretty significant compared to his road splits. So, Steven, if you scroll down, here we go. Oop. Some technical difficulties right now.
He's got a 1-something at home, and he's much worse on the road. And he's got
so his ERA is like 4 something on the road, and like borderline 1-2 something at home. He's significantly better at home, and then for Zach Gallen, he's significantly worse on the road compared to home. He's coming off 2 starts where he hasn't been that great. He gave up 5 earned runs in his last start. So I like the Giants here. It's probably my favorite play of the day, and the model agrees here. We have 10% value. So that's what I like today.
Yeah, so the Giants, they're 71 in the last 71 in the last 8 games that Cobb has pitched in. So they got that going for them. And then the Arizona, on the other hand, those guys, they only had a 33.3% win percentage in July. So they're not having a great time right now. Then they used to be one of the top teams in the National League record-wise. And you add that in with them, their ERA is 25th with a 4.62 ERA. So yeah, this team is not having a good time right now with pitching and then hitting and stuff. So that's why we like them right now.
Yeah, so they're losing 2 out of every 3 games in July. Well, now it's August, so let's see if they turn it around. But I think they were overperforming, kind of like I faded the Marlins. I think this is just them regressing back to the mean. And then we have some home run props. It's Dinger Tuesday, guys.
Let's go.
I am on 2 props today. Luis Robert on Chicago, the White Sox. You get him at plus 350 on FanDuel compared to plus 320 on DraftKings. So always line shop with these. And the best thing is that FanDuel has a better price, and they're the ones who have the Dinger Tuesday. We have him at plus 298 to homer. It's a pretty good value. We're going to talk a bit about Andrew Heaney later today in the futures segment. But I think it's a really good matchup for Robert against Heaney, who has a tendency to give up quite a bit of home runs. And then the other play is Willy Adames for Milwaukee. He's at plus 400 on FanDuel, which is the same on DraftKings. We have him at plus 314, so that's even more value than Luis Robert. Another matchup where Josiah Gray, he's been a little better this season, but he tends to give up the long ball when he gets hit. Willy Adames, he's right around the Mendoza line, but when he hits the ball, he hits homers. He has 17 homers this season. It's a good matchup for him. I like the value. The model likes the value.
Yeah, when Josiah Gray gets hit too, it's usually home runs.
It's home runs. So there's two guys who tend to give up quite a bit of home runs. And then I have one more play. It's a pitcher prop. I like Zach Eflin over 5.5 strikeouts. You get that plus 128 on FanDuel. I just got to fade my Yankees here. We look terrible. No one's hitting. I think they should be sellers, which I've been tweeting out nonstop. It's this is one where his past stats would say don't go with this play, especially on the road. But if you look at his more recent stats, he's been on fire. And then if you look up his last matchup against the Yankees, he had 9 strikeouts in 7 innings, and he pitched against the Yankees in relief last year when he was on the Phillies. He went 4 innings, didn't give up any earned runs, and he recorded 4 strikeouts. So he's pitched well against the Yankees. I'm fading my Yankees here. I think they should trade whoever they can besides Judge and Volpe. And just kind of do what they did in 2017, where they started calling these young guys up and kind of turned around the season. So that's what I would think they should do. So here you can see all of the plays today.
Yeah, so we've been keeping track of our plays that we've put on this show, and we'll continue to for the future, so you guys can keep up with us and hold us accountable. And Jake mentioned, the trade deadline coming up. We want to show you guys a little bit about what trades can look like in the model, and Steven put together the Texas Rangers are a great example. They just acquired 2 top 4 pitchers and replacing some pitchers on the Rangers, and it's really interesting to see what that can look like and how our model reacts to that. So Steven, if you want to show them a little bit how that works.
Yeah, sorry, I missed the technical difficulties. Obviously, every week it's something different. And apparently, if you tune to our software doing the podcast and YouTube at the same time, you turn off YouTube, YouTube still exists and keeps talking for a minute. So I was hearing 2 things at the same time, and yeah, that's what I was. It's my fault. I know it's a tangent, but I posted on Twitter that after Jake says, "Oh, I'm gonna talk about some Dinger Tuesdays," I was like, "Well, I'll be scrambling around, flipping through screens," and then I spoke into existence, the technical bug. But anyway, yeah. So as the guy who coded the model, not the baseball expert, certainly, one of the factors that we look at the reason why the model would rate certain players better than others is, these are the 2 starters that Texas acquired. And these are the pitchers that we think they'll replace in that top 4 rotation, the kind of pitchers that would probably pitch in a playoff series. And you can see the traditional stats, win-loss and ERA, batting average allowed, OPS allowed. You can see that Scherzer and Montgomery are better than the 2 that they're replacing. But this highlighted section are the numbers that my sim model relies on. And what it is when a pitcher starts, let's just say a team against all other opponents, the batters were getting out 60% of their plate appearances. And then Scherzer gets them out at, say, 65% one game. So then Scherzer's rewarded with a +5. And so we record how teams do and how pitchers do when they start based on this metric. This is one of many, but this is a critical one. And so you can see in this basically the out rate differential. What it does is, so players like Giolito, who was traded recently, he wasn't as good because some of his good traditional numbers, these were inflated by weaker competition. So this is our effort to try to rate pitchers based on how well they do against given their competition, and not just how well they do describing their individual stats. So when we're looking at that, we have Scherzer as, this is the last 2 seasons, as the 45th best pitcher in this dimension, Montgomery at 77. So if there's 30 teams, we're talking about Scherzer's been pitching like a high-end 2, Montgomery like a solid, a solid 3, high-end 3. Whereas the players that are replacing were 97th and 116th in this metric, which is more like a traditional late 3rd, 4th, and 5th starter. So that's the upgrade. So the impact for Texas, at least, is before the trade, before these trades, which was a few days ago, and since then they've lost 3 in a row. Our projected win total's actually gone down because they lost 3 in a row. And their playoff chances have gone down. Their chances of winning the division have gone down. But interestingly, their chances of winning the AL and winning the World Series have gone up. And more importantly, their chance of winning the World Series matchup versus the NL has gone up considerably. So if you look at the 5.9%, divide that by 14.8%, it's around 40%, meaning that every time they get to the World Series, they're winning around 40% of the time. With these upgrades to their starting rotation, that's gone up to 50%. So that's why you may not see the positive impact in win totals during the regular season, but you'll really see it. You should notice it in the playoffs when these pitchers upgrades really take prominence.
Yeah, so there's 238 starters in Steven's model that qualify for that. And Dane Dunning, who was their number 3 starter, is now their number 5. And this year, he's around 80th. And so that's top 3rd in the league. So they just got a ton of depth. They could see he's 176
overall,
but 80th this season. So he's pitching a lot better. He's 8-4 with 3.28, and he has the best OPS against out of all these pitchers. And they could even play him in the bullpen. He was a Gator. Sorry, Mackenzie, but he was a Gator, and he was actually that Gator team was so loaded that he pitched in relief on the weekends, and he was a midweek starter. So he has plenty of experience pitching in relief, and he could be a big weapon in the playoffs.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's take a look at some of the chat questions too. People are starting to pile them in. We have some questions about the Orioles, if you guys want to look into that a little bit and see if we have any value there.
Yeah, so I definitely want to talk about the Orioles. It's a great question. Ryu coming off a major injury. He hasn't pitched in a very long time. I do think there's value there. The Orioles are still underdogs. I got them at plus 110 last night. They're about even money, or not even money. They're about minus 110 pick 'em on the money line now. The thing with the Orioles, though, is Felix Bautista threw, I think it was 35 pitches yesterday. And then their other top 2 pitchers, Yanier Cano and Danny Coulomb, each pitched the last 2 days. So I don't know who's going to end up relieving for the Orioles. I don't mind a first 5. I think that's actually a better option because Kyle Bradish has been very good lately, and he dominated the Blue Jays the first time he faced them. But I also think the Orioles are just going to somehow find a way to win this game. They're 6-1 against the Blue Jays this season. The Blue Jays are 10-21 against the AL East, and the Blue Jays have lost 8 straight AL East games at home. 8 straight AL East games at home. They haven't won an AL East game at home since May. So I've got to go with the Orioles here.
Yeah, I like those too. And I do think first 5 could be a really good play with the relievers not being on full rest. Another question I saw earlier was, do we factor in umpires? I know Derek answered. He said no, but if you're debating on whether to play an over and we have value on the over in our model, sometimes you could just look if an umpire is hitter friendly or pitcher friendly, and that could be the deciding factor.
I might want to inject one thing that's pretty important. I do upgrade all Korean players in all my sports. So Ryu is, that's why he's a tremendous value on FanDuel, worth $1,800 over his salary. And DraftKings gets it. He knows that he's a man, so he's more even fairly priced on DraftKings. It's very important to recognize that. Thank you. Representation counts.
Just for the people in the chat to understand, so when you guys look at these first 5 inning or the overs, where can we look right now on the screen at this model where you're coming up with these numbers that you like?
Yeah, so I don't know if we have first 5 value yet, Maybe Steven could talk about that. But in terms of the money line, we see at the very top left, it opened at plus 106. That's on Caesars, I believe, or the consensus, not Caesars. Sorry, consensus. So I got it at plus 110 on another book, but open 106 and it's moved all the way to minus 108 already. I think that's also because Bo Bichette left yesterday with an injury, and it was a non-contact knee injury, so it looked really bad, to be honest. He hasn't been placed on the IL yet, which is good, but I would think that he at least gets a day off.
I would assume that he gets today off as well.
Yeah, it did not look good at all.
But we don't have anything specifically right now for first five, but what I look at is our projection for innings pitched for the starter. So, without going into too many details, we obviously, when we're doing simulations, you look at how the starter does, and then based on how the simulation is going, you use the bullpen. And then we look at, which relievers are available, and you have like a bullpen quality within the sim. So I would look, if I'm going to bet first five, I would make sure that the projected starters are projected to pitch the first five. And it's over the years, it's when I first started doing this stuff, 50 years ago, it seems like, you get, pitchers to try to go 6 innings. Now it's like very common for pitchers to, well, obviously there's openers, but others to go, 3.5, 4, or 5, innings and be done with it. So in this case, you have a pretty high innings pitch projection here, and then the lesser projection for Rue shows that, maybe he's not pitching that great, compared to what he would do if he was in a groove.
Right.
Coming off a major injury too, it's kind of tough to, even for the model, to come up with a number for him, because the model goes off of the last 2 years stats, Steven. So if he's been out for a very long time, the sample size gets even smaller.
Yeah, look at that. 2022 ends there. So we're not talking about a lot of history here or recent history.
So I think that's it for our baseball. Looking at the chat for any more games. If anyone has any other questions, we'll certainly answer at the end of the show. Before we hop over to football, we have a nice little surprise for everyone here. We do have our own promo code now, Model. If you want to join for a 10-day free trial on any plan, you go to sportsline.com/join and use our code Model, which we just got, which is very exciting news for us. So with that said, I'm happy to
let me say something real fast. So everybody, make sure Jake and I are going to go into the chat. They're going to go into football. So make sure if you have any questions, ask them in the chat, and Jake and I will be answering. But we're headed out.
Yeah, the boys are headed to the chat, our baseball guys. So we're going to move over to some NFL futures. Season is coming up. Steven, I know you've been very high on Houston. If you want to let the people know why you think so.
Yeah, it's actually a kind of love-hate with Houston, because the hate being if all teams were playing the same schedule, this model would say Houston's the 30th best team in the league. So that's not a nice thing to say. At the same time, they are basically the strongest over right now in terms of, for reasons we'll get into now. So the line is the best line I saw yesterday was 6.5 on Caesars at plus 120 on the over. This line was 5.5 at the start of the summer. So it looks like there's some theming, some action coming in. Some of the more popular talk show hosts out there who get heavily into gambling are talking up Houston's over as well. So I can see the narrative moving this. So you want to get 6.5 before it even except the 7. The biggest thing is the schedule. So they have what we would consider, using our sim model, as the 4th easiest schedule in the league. And if you look at it, so I know this is a little not necessarily clear. So this is our projected for the season wins and losses, chance of winning division in the playoffs. I point to this first game at Baltimore as a critical one, where our projected score is basically identical to the betting line. It's another case where, and our futures line for Baltimore is basically the same as the betting line. So the model, SportsLine model, and the NFL odds makers are basically having the exact same power ranking and assessment of Houston and Baltimore in this case, but Houston. So for us to have strong overvalue, that leads me to believe that the odds makers have lowered the line in Houston based on public and consensus and where the action is. And again, you wouldn't, why offer a line like 7 or 7.5 when you can get 6.5 and get the action properly balanced. But if you look, go back to that table for a second, Mackenzie, my screen here. If you look at the opponents, these stats aren't everything, but past quarterback rating is still something relevant in my book. Yards per carry. So these are the defensive rankings of Houston's opponents. Their average opponent is only the 19th best team in the league. So it's winning 47% of these simulations. Obviously, if they're an average, they'd be winning 50. Their average opposing defense is only 18th best in passer rating allowed. So that's where the weakness of the schedule comes in. So we have such a wickedly high 77% chance of going over 7+ wins, because if you want to, go back to one thing.
Yeah.
If you look at Houston's, let me bring up this form shows some, basically, I call it gambling data that makes it easier for me to look at actual stats quickly. That the reason why Houston's terrible, in my book, the main reason is their run differential. 2 years ago, they were outgained 84 to 142 per game, and they won 4 games. Then they got somehow worse than that last year, where they were almost doubled up per game. So the reasons for that is, Dameon Pierce had a great start last year, then sort of slowed down, got dinged up. So they addressed that concern with Devin Singletary coming in as a nice complementary, solid 40% of the share touches probably. And then D'Amico Ryans along the other side was a tackling machine as a player. Looks like he could still do it, frankly. But we are banking on the defense with Will Anderson, who's a good all-around defender, not just a pass rusher, right, to narrow that gap. So, for example, instead of being outrun by 70, and in week 1 we have the Ravens outrushing them by 50. But more importantly, in some of their easier matchups within the division, within the NFC matchups they have, they're not getting demolished, right? So instead of being outgained by 65 yards a game, we're projecting more like a 25-yard differential, which is still bad, which is still indicative of a 7-win team or a 6-win team. But we think that by closing that gap, they get to more of a 6-win team, and then you have an easier schedule that gets into the 7 wins, and that's the math getting over 6.5.
Right. It's important to note that we're not thinking this is a Super Bowl team. We just think they suck less than they were going to suck based off their new additions. And like you mentioned, D'Amico Ryans, Will Anderson, they already have this great promising defense, and now they're just adding to it. And their biggest problem was their run differential, and now they're adding Devin Singletary to take some of that weight off. So it's more about those reasons and the people they're playing. I think that's important for our viewers to understand, than the specific talent of this team. But sometimes it's
personally, yeah. I mean, sorry about not to inject my own personal opinions. I personally like to hedge. I don't like hedging money. Like, I don't say, I made this bet and I'm going to hedge over here to minimize losses or make slight 1% gain. I hedge my professional picks with my personal enjoyment. So in week 1, Houston plays at Baltimore. Obviously, I'm a Ravens fan. I hope the Ravens win resoundingly. But if Houston pulls off a big upset in week 1, they're 9.5-point underdogs. Then at least my pick for over is well on its way, right? A team that a chance that they should have maybe a 0.25% chance, a 25% chance of winning. Then they get plus 0.75 towards this over. So either way, I win, right? You either win because my team wins, or you win because the over bet is looking strong just after week 1. That's how you live in this world of betting. Make sure that you never double down on the teams you want to win, financially and emotionally.
Yeah, so the NFC South, they are those 4 teams are in the bottom 10 of points per game for the NFL. So that makes them even worse. And then also in their division, 2 of the 3 teams are in the bottom 5 in points per game. So they're getting about 17 points a game that they're averaging between the Indianapolis Colts and the Tennessee Titans. So you add that up with the defense is getting better for the Texans. I mean, that's 6 games right there that they should be competitive to win. So then you also add in Arizona, that's 7 games. So there you have, they're just right there. That's 7 games that they can possibly win, just based off of these teams having new quarterbacks for one, that those quarterbacks from last year were a little bit better. So now they gotten even worse. And some have rookies now, like with the Colts, most likely playing. So they have a good chance in winning these games and taking the over.
Right. And someone mentioned Joe Burrow, which we actually talked about earlier today. So Steven actually did run some numbers on that, a couple hypotheticals of what his season could look like, depending on how many games he does miss, since we don't really know for sure yet. But Steven, if you want to show that.
Yeah, this is just the numbers that we assume if Burrow is 100%, or even if he's ready to go week one, that it's a competitive division. But we do have them as a favorite in the AFC North, and a really solid Super Bowl percentage. Not enough to make a good betting value, because on the futures line, they're at plus 1,000. So we would not take them to win the Super Bowl at this point. But if Burrow's out 3 games, not the end of the world. 6 games, even to 6 games, it's not, they still got a pretty solid shot, 50-50 shot in making the playoffs, and are still one of the top 10 teams in Super Bowl percentage. The really extensive injury, one that he's out more than half the season, 9 games. That's the bad one, because that would mean you miss both games against Baltimore. They play Baltimore week 2, and I believe week 10, which would be the 9th game. And he missed a game against Buffalo. So that's where you see the biggest drop off, especially to win the division, because the most likely competitive team to win the AFC North would be Baltimore, and then one of the other top 3 AFC contenders is Buffalo.
Right. Yeah. So we're going to move into some player prop features that me and Derek have looked into. And since we're talking about these injuries, it's basically the main reason that I have picked this prop, which is Jerry Jeudy over 875 receiving yards. Now, I actually was looking at him as a fantasy player, researching, receivers round 2, round 3, and went to look at his line, and honestly was stunned by how low it is. And Steven ran the numbers, and we do have him projected at 965 receiving yards, which, as you can see, is a really big discrepancy with the odds makers. And a lot of it has to do with this offense needing their own identity. Tim Patrick is out for the season, as we just learned. Javonte Williams is coming off an injury. Who knows how long until he's 100% healthy. And then it's really, who else is going to be that guy? Marvin Mims, maybe. You have Sutton. But I feel pretty confident that if you're going to invest in anybody on this offense, it will be Jerry Jeudy. And I have a feeling that Sean Payton and Russell Wilson also agree on that.
Yeah, so Williams, he's coming back off of an injury. They're going to slowly ease him back into the lineup. So they're going to probably lean on, Wilson to throw the ball a little bit more than they did last year. So this is why we're thinking that Jerry Jeudy will have, more yards than what people expect.
But we want to shop around, right, Mackenzie? Like, that's the interesting thing about this one is the best part about our CBS Sports no longer having an exclusive gambling partner is we can now mention other sports books. And so what were the various lines we had?
I mean, Caesars is up to like 925. So BetMGM right now is at 875. DraftKings was on that. They just took it off because of the Patrick injury. So this might be something you do want to hop on soon before other books realize that Jerry Jeudy is likely the only option on this offense.
Yeah, we have. Let's see. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, you go. If you have some lines, go ahead.
No, it's taking too long to load. We can go ahead. There's a long list that I have to go through here. So yeah, we can go ahead.
Yeah.
One thing I like to do is, if you want to pop my screen up for a second, Mackenzie, I like to make sure that when we have an over, I like to see that our assessment of a player from a fantasy perspective isn't completely out of whack with what our colleagues here, the Fantasy Football Today experts, think. And so in this case, I'm actually feeling good because Jeudy, we have him as, this is PPR, but we have him as wide receiver 22, which is right in line, a little worse than the wide receiver 20 that Dave, Jamie, and Heath's consensus has. So it's not like we're picking the over on Jeudy because we have this obscenely better view of him. We have the same view of him as our experts. And in light of that, that gives me like the nice kind of quiet confidence that, he'll hit this number as long as he stays healthy.
Right. And then right. And Derek also looked into some player props himself. We're looking at Aaron Jones under 6.5 rushing touchdowns specifically. Our projection is at 3.6. Derek, if you want to explain that one.
Yeah, so you just look at the numbers right there. I mean, that's a discrepancy between the two. And, I dug a little bit deeper into this. And the rushing attempts for Aaron Jones was 213 rush attempts. And out of those 213 rush attempts, 110 of them was against 8 men in the box. That's roughly about a little bit over half of his rush attempts with 8 men in the box. This year, with Jordan Love being the quarterback and not Aaron Rodgers, I'm going to assume this goes up to more than just that. I got those stats from True Media. And so also with True Media, what I found out, he only scored 1 rushing touchdown within that 110 rush attempts that was with 8 men in the box. So he had a total of 2 rushing touchdowns for the whole entire season last year and 4 the previous season. That's a total of 6. So when you add up, those together, and then they have the 6.5 is the actual, line for this, then that's why we have it as the under. And then also Aaron Jones and Dylan, they have a discrepancy in the amount of touches, rush attempts inside the 20-yard line. So we have Aaron Jones with 44% of the touches from inside the 20-yard line compared to 41 for Dylan. You think, oh, that's pretty much true because Aaron Jones is the starter. But once you get inside the 10-yard line, that's where we see the difference here. And so it's 53%, a little bit under 53% of the rush attempts inside the 10-yard line is A.J. Dillon. And then Aaron Jones is only 23%. So you go inside the 5-yard line, then it's A.J. Dillon, it is just under, it's 62.5% of the rushing attempts inside the 5-yard line. It's Dillon compared to 12.5% for Aaron Jones. So as they get closer to the goal line, it's going to be Dillon that's getting most of those carries. It's very hard in the NFL to score a touchdown outside the 20-yard line. So if you have any of any fantasy leagues, you can take some of this information for your fantasy league, such as if you get more points for rushing touchdowns. Then you should probably look at Dillon if you need to draft someone on the Green Bay Packers. And then you can also use this information for while you're drafting people, and it's just on rushing touchdowns. Yes, Aaron Jones could have more touchdowns receiving, but with this prop 6.5, we just see massive value on the under.
And one other point I could add, Derek, is Jordan Love. He's one good year at Utah State, which was his sophomore year. He only averaged for 63 rushing yards, so he wasn't he wasn't Lamar Jackson, obviously, but he has 7 rushing touchdowns. So obviously he was being used in goal line situations. Now the year he was no good, he didn't have any the next year. So I'm wondering, sort of like Kenny Pickett when he started with Pittsburgh last year, who's not he's a mobile person, he's not a running quarterback, but he's mobile. Most of his touchdowns early were actually rushing touchdowns, and that's how he kind of uses legs. So maybe with Love being a first-year starter, even in goal line situations, not only Dillon, but maybe it's Love also getting a few, keeping the ball in his hands rather than trying to make a play out of the passing game in the red zone.
Yeah, and then they alternate possessions too. So Aaron Jones will start the first series, and then the second series would be Dillon. So when you have split carries like that, that's even less of a chance for him to score, but less opportunities to score.
So when he plays, Aaron Jones only accounts for 27% of the team's rushing touchdowns when he plays. Dillon 50%. So that's you compare that to, say, I don't know, Cordell Patterson last year for Atlanta. Other players who split time, they're at 50%.
And I think this is a good comment here because it's not necessarily that Aaron Jones won't be successful this season. It's just he's not the guy usually scoring the touchdowns. So when you see a line like this, do you guys agree that taking his rushing yards in general will be a good play?
I do. I was looking at comparing to our assessment of Jones. This is a PPR league. We have him as the 11th best running back. The experts' consensus is 12th. Standard leagues, we have him at 13th. Expert consensus 14th. So we have the exact same kind of assessment of him as our Fantasy Football Today experts. And this is based on a projection of over 900 rushing yards. So this is Aaron Jones will still do plenty of damage between the 20s, or I guess between the 10s. And I think over in this case. Now I know there's a lot of concerns about injury for running backs after a certain number of hits. I don't know how many carries Jones has, but the model is assuming health. And it looks like we have plenty of wiggle room. The line was 775, you said?
779 is what they had.
So that's a pretty good amount of wiggle room for allowing 2 or 3 missed games.
Right.
Yeah, so like on DraftKings, they have it as 800 and a half was the over under. So yeah, if you can get it under that, yes, take the over.
Yeah.
Just shop around.
Yeah.
Yeah, that looks like some. Caesars might have 875 and a half early in the summer. So yeah, if you can get 100 below the Caesars lines, then rock on.
We had a couple comments about CMC just in regards to see have like an inflated line like someone like Tua would. Do we think that the odds makers have inflated this just for being a popular guy?
No, I mean, again, we have health, assuming health, which isn't always the case for McCaffrey. And I think that they have so much depth and, great running options that if you were a little banged up, they would just rest him for playoffs, I would assume. So the line, but we have overvalue based on him actually playing, basically a full season. It looks like the line's 900 and a half at DraftKings, 850 on Caesars. Do you see anything lower? I don't know what FanDuel's line is.
No, I don't see anything lower than that. Because DraftKings was the 900 and a half. FanDuel is
I wouldn't
850 and a
consider.
half.
Yeah, I would not consider our 950-ish projection a good over. Because if you look at, because assume the juice is, let's say it's minus 110, it's like 10% over. You'd want at least 10% over 900 is, 990. So the projection isn't over isn't an overvalue based on when you consider the juice here. So
Right.
You have two concerns with health and then the juice.
Yeah.
Then also Mitchell, like if you saw, in the last year, Mitchell and McCaffrey was pretty much splitting carries when they were healthy. And so they're going to try to limit the amount of hits like for McCaffrey just so he's a little bit fresher. Then they also lined him up at wide receiver just to, to limit his amount of hits because he does have a history of being injured. So they're going to take that into consideration. So just letting everyone know.
Right.
Yeah, you don't see a huge line share. So this percentage of 55% is the percentage of rushing yards, team rushing yards that McCaffrey accounted for when he played. Mitchell was right on 40. And then you have these other guys, Devo and Jordan Mason at 13. And I just saw an article on CBS yesterday saying Mason is a out of nowhere candidate to pop. So if you add these up, you have well over 100%. So, if somehow all these players for San Francisco actually stayed healthy, which usually doesn't happen. You right? So I guess if you have any kind of inside information with their training, health, and conditioning training staff, then maybe that'll alter your opinion. But I don't look over in any of these cases.
Yeah. So it looks like we covered what the chat wanted to hear about football, but obviously there's a lot of trades going on. I know the chat's been asking John and Jake about that. So let's bring them back in. I know they have some trade updates and the way it's been impacting our model.
Yeah, we got some breaking news during the show. There were two trades that went down, actually. The Padres traded for Rich Hill and G-Man Choi. I'm sure Steven's a fan of that trade. And
because I love Rich Hill. Yeah, I'll tell a story about Rich Hill.
Oh, yeah, both the guys. And so while it doesn't seem like a big trade and you're wondering why the Padres would make a move, Rich Hill isn't really replacing anyone in the rotation. He's replacing Ryan Weathers, who was slated to start. So with the move, it actually slightly helped San Diego more than you would think. Their playoff percentage went from 22% to 23.6%. But the other move that went down was a bit of a bigger move. Was Toronto just traded for Paul DeJong, and it's looking like Bo Bichette is going to go in the IL. It looks like that injury that John was talking about could have been pretty significant. So I ran two scenarios. The first scenario was if Bichette is just out 2 weeks and they landed DeJong. Their World Series percentage went from 3.6% to 3.3%. And their playoff percentage went from 64.4% to 63.9%. Then I ran the extreme scenario if Bichette is out for the season. And the Blue Jays playoff percent went from 64.4 to 62.8. So quite a bit of a drop, but not as big as you would think. And the World Series percent went from 3.6% to 3.2%.
That is interesting. I really thought it would be a lot more, especially because the Blue Jays are in the last wild card spot right now. They need everyone they can get, and they've got 4 or 5 teams that are also buying and chasing them. Also, I want to say, I think Ross Adkins and Mozliak are best friends right now. They've probably been on the phone more than any of us have been with our relatives in the past couple of days. The Cardinals and Blue Jays connection is fine right now.
If I want to just mention a point as far as sometimes batters don't have as much of an impact as you might think, as certainly as what their salaries would indicate. So sit down. This is good. I'm going to explain a little of the simple, I call it simple math. Hopefully it's simple. That goes into the model of why you might not see as big of an impact as you might think. And so if you look at historically run differential, the teams that win like 20 games over 500, the 100 win teams, they usually outscore teams by around 1 run per game, 160 per season. In our model, we look at players and the amount of total bases and walks they generate. And if you just look at it from a team perspective, the average team is scoring around 4.5 runs on 18 total bases and based on balls. The actual numbers are like 4.43 and 17 points, but 0.25. The simple math tells you that for every time a player doesn't get out, they're generating 0.25 runs for their team on average. So the last few years where Trout and Judge were the best hitters, they were at 2.8 in this metric. The average average hitter, which I called maybe the 150th best player, 30 teams, 5th best starter, they were at 1.8. And so the difference, if you replace an average player with a Trout or Judge in their prime playing 150 games, they'd be delivering you 1 more non-out, which would translate, if they played 150 games, to 37.5 more runs. At the math that we started out here, that translates to around 4.7 wins. So when you upgrade massively from average to superstar Hall of Famer, you can get nearly a 5-win improvement. When you're talking about some of these other cases, with the players you talked about, Bichette and who's that?
Bichette and Dion.
37th at 2.26.
This is also how WAR is calculated, guys, by the way.
Yeah, 1.62. You see a pretty good 0.6 difference. So you have if you had an entire season sample size, it could be a 2.5 win drop. But with the relatively reduced remaining schedule, you might be well under a win difference, and the percentages aren't as significant as you would see if it was the entire season.
Yeah, and that's pretty much how they do the math for baseball teams as well, in terms of how to create wins and how many runs equals a win. So that's a pretty good example from Steven of how you can calculate that sort of stuff.
Yeah, but the one reason why we do it the way I do it is, I wasn't paying attention to the growth of sabermetrics and traditional math, and I needed a job. So if I just regurgitated other people's stuff, I wouldn't have a job. But more importantly, to run simulations, I need to have parameters and values that are capturing the variance, right? It's one thing to say on average it's +1 and that equals 4.7 wins, and that translates to percentages. But to really, for sports and all natural processes, there's so much variance around it, and the variance isn't always normally distributed, isn't always like plus or minus a nice standard deviation. Like in football, for example, the average yards per carry might be 4.5, but the chance of a player running for 4 or 5 yards is actually under 15%, right? So the average is not indicative of what the most common result is. Baseball, obviously, you have there's a big difference. There's no 1.5 hits. So you can't just rely on traditional advanced analytics and stats in sports and slap up a win percentage that we feel confident about. We run the simulations to account for all these different variables at one time.
Yep. Welcome to SportsLine Stats 101.
Yeah, mic drop.
This is more like 201. I don't know if you graduated 101.
This is grad school level.
Ole Miss master's degree. I'll be a little bit of an education snob. I'm not sure about that Ole Miss. I think Michigan anthropology grads masters count more than Ole Miss masters.
Yeah. Well, before we wrap up, we can get back to baseball if we need to. Someone mentioned another NFL future, thinking AJ Brown over 7.5 touchdowns. Seemed low. I just wanted to see what the model thinks of that and if we have any value there.
Yeah. So I almost clicked on Tennessee because once a player is imprinted on my mind about where they're associated with, it stays with me. So first thing's AJ Brown. We have, again, a very similar ranking for him as the Fantasy Football Today experts have. So we have a projection of 72 receptions for 1148 yards and right around 10 touchdowns, which is a pretty big number. So the line is what, 7.5?
Yeah. So
we have, pretty good wiggle room for an injury. I don't see any reason why he can't maintain his high. You see the percentage of team receiving touchdowns he gets when he plays. It's over 40%. It's extremely high.
Mm-hmm.
It's the tight end got it at just 20.5%. So,
Yeah, I think they're still going to pass the ball a lot, even though they have Penny, but Penny is really injury prone. So when you add that, they're just going to pass the ball a lot and try to run out the clock, running the football. And so with this 9.9, and then on like DraftKings, they have it as over unders at 7.5, so minus 120 on the over, and then plus 100 on the under. So even they're thinking it's going to be over 7.5. So I mean, that seems like a good value there.
Yeah, I don't know if this still holds. You may have just said this, but there could be significant value playing better juice. So like Caesars at plus 100.
Yeah, I'm trying to look through all of them right now. I saw that.
So shop around before 7.5. Yeah. Not all 7.5s are built the same.
Some of these sites are not user friendly to quickly look up stuff.
Yeah. Well, even back to the MLB, obviously there will be more news tonight that we'll be all over, and hopefully we'll be able to share it with you, and maybe can share it next week. So keep bringing your questions. We're going to wrap it up here. We want to answer your guys' questions, so come prepared for next week as well. But that's really all we have for today. Obviously, more NFL futures coming next week, more MLB plays, a lot of updates from the trade deadline. So we're excited to show you guys that. Whatever feedback you have for the team, we'd always love to hear, and we're excited to see.
Not me. I don't like feedback. I like compliments. I don't like feedback. I'm sorry. One thing, Mackenzie, I have been pushing internally to try to do Q&A almost every day in the Burrow show here. So I'm not going to get that if we have 5 people asking questions. So we need to have around 500 people asking questions, and then we can get them in, and you might be able to see this delightful bunch every day.
Right.
Every day, including some weekends.
Yeah, that's the plan. You'll be seeing more and more of us as the season goes on, as we get to the NFL. So look forward to that. Think about your questions for next week, and we will certainly be here to answer them. And we hope everyone has a great Tuesday.